Hi guys, welcome back to Jesus in Mind podcast. We are continuing on today with Job chapters 31 through 42. I don't know if that's right. I'll have to check in a second. But first we're going to start off with a recap. So let's go on and get into it. Welcome back to recap. So right now in the recap, at the moment, Job has just cried out to God, and he doesn't understand why God is not answering his cries. So that's where we're at right now, is Job has just asked God, what is happening? Why isn't he answering his cries? And if you go back to chapter 30, verses 1 through 23, Job just continues to describe his crisis and everything, and that's why he's crying out to God. So let's go on and get into chapter 31. Job chapter 31. So starting off with verses 1 through 4, Job is arguing that he was godly and blameless. He is a godly and blameless man. He explains that he was pure. He shows self-control. So he's pretty much explaining reasons why God didn't punish him and he hasn't done anything wrong. So he doesn't understand why this is happening to him. Verses 5 through 8, he knows he lived a blameless life and doesn't care. Doesn't care if they examine that. He knows that he was not sinful. So he's pretty much saying, I lived a blameless life and I know that. So if you guys want to look into me and really examine my life, go ahead and do it because I know that I'm right. So going on, verses 9 through 12, Job's explaining his point by his relationship with his wife. He says if he was sinful towards her, he would have gotten her taken away. So he's saying pretty much he's proving his point that he's not sinful. He's saying, well, if my wife is still with me, that's how I know that I'm not sinful, because if I was sinful towards her, then she would have gotten taken away from me. Going on, verses 13 through 15, Job says being holy is best tested by how they act towards people that are less than him. Job knew God wouldn't ask him why he treated people the way he did, because Job knows that he treated people a good way, so he has nothing to really be afraid of. Going on, verses 16 through 23, Job insisted that he had been good to the poor. He called for a curse upon himself if he hadn't cared for the poor. So he's pretty much saying, well, I'll curse myself if I haven't been good to the poor, because he knows that he's been good to the poor. So pretty much this whole time he's just really I know that I did right and it's not my fault. Going on, verses 24 through 28, he also insisted that he had not made riches his hope or his confidence. So he's still going on and proving I haven't done this and I haven't done this. I didn't rely on my riches or anything. Verses 29 through 37, he also says he was not ever happy when his enemy had suffered or anything. Job then stops himself, implying that he has made his case clear. So he pretty much says his last case and he's I've made my case clear. I'm done talking for now. You can decide now. Verses 38 through 40, Job has made it clear that he is done arguing his case. So he's pretty much if you don't believe me now, then I'm done arguing it. There's no reason to argue because I know I'm right and you guys think I'm wrong. So that's where we're at on chapter 31. Chapter 32, verses 1 through 5. At the end of Job's argument, his friends had nothing more to say. They still think that he's wrong, but they think that he's too far gone. Elihu was silent this whole time, and he wants to talk now. So pretty much Job's three friends were okay, whatever, I'm done. And now Elihu I don't know if I'm saying that right, but we'll hope I am. He's stepping in and he's okay, well, I'm right. I know I'm right. It's time for me to talk, because he's been silent this whole time, letting his friends get on to Job pretty much. Going on, verses 6 through 9. Elihu was quiet at first because he's younger. So pretty much back then, especially it still is now, but especially back then, if you were younger, you were kind of less than. So he didn't want to speak up because he was younger. But he believed that it didn't matter now, because he had the understanding of God too. After he talks, Job and his friends write against it, but Elihu continues asking for their attention. So pretty much Elihu starts to talk and everyone's okay, shut up, you have nothing to say, like, you're too young, like, we don't have to listen to you. Going on, verses 11 through 14, Elihu is frustrated because they aren't listening to him in the way that he thinks they should be. So he's just getting kind of mad now, like, why aren't you guys listening to me? Verses 15 through 22, in Elihu's mind, it was good that he had so much energy and words to say. For the next 5 chapters, he's unable to shut up. So the next 5 chapters is pretty much him saying the same thing that Job's friends have already said, but we'll go ahead and skim through those. So, I also have down here, this is bad because he doesn't care to flatter anyone but himself. So pretty much he's kind of self-centered and he's like, well, I know what I'm talking about. Let me step in here. So that is the end of chapter 22. Going on to chapter 33. Chapter 33. So verses 1 through 7, Elihu demonstrates his gift for speaking without saying much. He wants to prove that he's just as good as them. So he's pretty much still proving his point, like, I'm just as good as you guys, let me talk. Going on, verses 8 through 11, Elihu says that he listened to Job very carefully. Elihu is faithful while explaining Job's mind. He's pretty much, like I said, gonna say the exact same thing that Job's friends have already said, but he's saying, like, I listened to this whole argument, now let me step in because I know the right. Verses 12 through 18, Elihu is proud and confident like most young men. He thinks God has taught Job and Job just didn't listen. So, talk to Job is what I meant to say. But pretty much he's like still saying, like, I'm right, you're wrong. And he's explaining the same thing that his friends already said. Verses 19 through 28, he was saying God spoke to Job in a dream, but he now thinks maybe God spoke to Job through physical pain. So he's like, oh, well, maybe God didn't speak to you like in a dream. He spoke to you in physical pain. That's how he's talking to you. Verses 29 through 33, Elihu wants Job to know God is being very patient with him. Job thought God was being harsh, so Elihu wanted him to appreciate God. So Elihu, like I said, is repeating himself kind of, and he's repeating what everyone else has already said, which is why we're going to go through these next couple chapters pretty fast, because it's literally 5 chapters full of him saying the same thing repetitively. So going on to chapter 34. Chapter 34, verses 1 through 9. Elihu starts to quote the words Job said, and that he feels Job was accusing God in. This is where Elihu gets it wrong because Job never claimed to be completely sinless. So verses 10 through 15, Elihu followed on by saying, you always reap what you sow, which is what Eliphaz had said earlier. So, like I said, he's literally repeating everything that the friends have already said. He's just repeating it like he knows better. Verses 16 through 20, Elihu is making unfair assumptions. He thinks Job's cries mean Job was condemning God. Elihu was emphasizing the perfect justice of God. So he's pretty much emphasizing that God is perfect, and he thinks that Job was in the wrong here. Verses 21 through 30, Elihu continues to saying things about God's perfect justice. He emphasizes that nothing can be hidden from God. He's warning Job. So, once again, warning Job, same thing that the friends have already done. Verses 31 through 33, Eliphaz here speaks that he thinks Job should have said. He criticizes Job now by saying, should God do what you think he should do? So pretty much he's like criticizing Job, like, do you really think that God should just listen to you, do whatever you want him to do? So, like I said, he's kind of just being a little bit ruder than Job's friends were. Verses 34 through 37, he says this is a common opinion of all of the other worldly men. So he's comparing Job to every other worldly man out there, pretty much. Going on to chapter 35. Chapter 35, verses 1 through 3. Elihu is being rude now. He is accusing Job of a bunch of things. He even accused him of deriving God's order. So, pretty much, Elihu is still saying the same exact thing that Job's friends have already said. So that is why I'm going so quick through these, because it's literally so repetitive, it's not even funny. So going on, verses 4 through 8. Eliphaz has the same idea as Job's friends had, like I said. But Elihu thinks he's different and can fix Job and his 3 friends. So pretty much, Elihu isn't only trying to fix Job at this point, he's trying to fix the 3 friends for not being able to fix Job. Going on, verses 9 through 12. Eliphaz knows that the general men do not cry out to God when they feel afflicted. He says men normally seek God, but they aren't sincere about it. He says that God doesn't answer when this happens. So he's accusing Job of things still, and just going on about how this is why God isn't answering you. Verses 13 through 16, he goes back to rudely speaking to Job. His idea is that God didn't hear him because he is false. So that is the end of chapter 35, going on to chapter 36. I'm going to go ahead and go on to chapter 36, and we're actually going to do chapter 36 and 37 right now, and we'll go on from there, because it's kind of, like I said, repetitive. So verses 1 through 4, Eliphaz starts to kind of understand, okay, these people are getting uncomfortable with the way that I'm talking, so I should probably stop. But he doesn't stop. He just thinks that. And then verses 5 through 12, he talks again about God's power and his perfect justice, and he's clearly counting Job as a wicked person. Verses 13 through 15, Eliphaz thinks Job is a hypocrite, and he feels like Job is putting himself under a greater and greater outpouring of God's wrath. So he's pretty much you're going to get it worse because you keep denying that you're sinful. Verses 16 through 21, he speaks to Job about what God would have done for him, what God would have done for Job if Job would have repented like Elihu thought he should. So pretty much going on, same thing. He thinks that Job could have he's saying God's going to bring his wrath down, and it's going to be worse than it would have been if he would have just repented. Going on, verses 22 through 25, he still goes on about how, in his eyes, Job has the problem, and it's Job's problem, and God was punishing him for that. Verses 26 through 33, he wants Job to know that God is beyond Job now. He uses water as an example of God's brilliance, and he is saying that every wicked man is scared of thunder because it's considered to be the voice of God. So he's saying Job, you're scared because that's the voice of God, and you're scared he's bringing wrath on you. Chapter 37, verses 1 through 5. Eliphaz thinks Job needs to hear about the greatness of God. It's good advice, just not for what Job needed, which is kind of how the friends were. Like I said earlier, it's pretty much repetitive this whole time. So, going on, verses 6 through 13, Eliphaz talks about God's voice being like thunder, and now he's saying that God's voice is like snow, the gentle rain and heavy rain. So that's what he's comparing it. In verses 6 through 13, he says, in verse 6, for to the snow set, he says, and then says likewise to the downpour. So that's where that comes in. Verses 14 through 18, Elihu started to talk in a very personal way towards Job, he's getting him personally. And then verses 18 through 24, Elihu confronts Job about what he thinks is Job's arrogance. And then he returned back to what he was talking about earlier. He wanted to tell Job he was wrong about God owning him. So that's where we are now, and we're going on to chapter 38 now. Chapter 38, verse 1. So God has been really absent during this whole scene over this time when Job has been wanting God to say something. So that's what verse 1 just says, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said. So now we're going on to what God is saying now. So this is all God that we're reading for the rest of this. Verses 2 through 3. God asked this question, but we don't really know who he's talking to, because Elihu was the last speaker that has been talking, and he claimed to be talking for God, but clearly he wasn't. But we can't say like what every person has, like the darkened counsel by words. So that's like what God is saying. He says, who is this that darkens counsel by the words without knowledge? So we can assume that he's probably talking to Elihu, because that's the last speaker, and that would be the logical thing, but we're also not sure, because there could be missed things in there. Verses 4 through 7, God clearly knows he is powerful, and Job is nowhere near God. Job was not there when the earth was created. So he says, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? And so he's pretty much like, stop questioning me, because I am God, I'm the Almighty. You are nothing compared to me. Then verses 8 through 11, reference to the second day of creation. So remember, like the second day of creation back in Genesis. So Job wasn't around, so he was no idea how it was done. So he's saying like, or who shut in the sea with the doors, reference to the second day of creation here, and that's in verse 8. Verses 12 through 18, God asked the perfect question. Job had probably never even entered the ocean and didn't know there were springs, which means he knows nothing about the gates of death, etc. So he says, have you commanded the morning since the days begin, and caused the dawn and know in this place? So he's going on with this big long question. Have you entered into, verses 16, he says, have you entered into the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? So God is asking questions like, have you done any of these things that you have? So because he knows Job has no idea about any of these things. So he's like, you don't know anything about this. Trust in me. Verses 19 through 24. Verses 19 through 24. Job might know all of these things because he gets old, that he is old and wise. God is giving him a chance to speak up. So he's in verses 19 through 24, he says, where is the way to the dwelling of the light, and where is the place of the darkness, that you may take it into territory? So he's like, all this, and that you may discern the paths to its home. So he's kind of giving Job like a chance to speak up here. Verses 25 through 30, Elihu before used water to show God's greatness. Now God is using knowing how these things were designed to prove his greatness. So he's not just showing the greatness, he's proving it. Verse 31 through 33, God is challenging Job on his knowledge, and he also exposed Job's lack of might and greatness. So he's exposing that Job is not as wise as he kind of like was saying that he is, and he's like, you're not as great and wise as I am. Verse 34 through 38, Job is powerless over the stray sky, constellations, clouds, lightning, etc. Job knew he was intelligent and wise. So he's like saying like, Job knows that God is intelligent and wise. Verse 39 through 41, God went through all of the things, even the ability to hunt prey for the lion. Job couldn't even do that. So he's pretty much like, God is going through all the little tiny like things that he has put into this world that Job can't even comprehend. So that's the end of chapter 38, going on to chapter 39. Chapter 39, verses 1 through 4. God keeps bringing his level of knowledge down to Job. God reminded him that the level of growth and maturity that he created himself. So he's like, if you think about how like crazy it is, like the level of like growth and maturity you go through, like your life, everything like that, like God created that. He made every little tiny detail of that. And so that's something that he's like, look, I am the Almighty. Like you could not even begin to like fathom this. So that's where we're at right now. Verses 5 through 8, Job had no knowledge of these facts about nature, even less about animals. God knew all things like donkeys, like about the donkeys, he says, has let the wild donkey go free. So that's where that donkey comes in. But Job clearly didn't. So going on, like, God is still saying, like, I know so much more than you. Like, just trust me, because you can't even fathom all these things that I know every little detail about. Verses 9 through 12. Job tackled the knowledge of a mastery over the natural world. So now he's like, okay, like, this is like hard. Like, he's tackling it like lacked. That's what I meant to say. Job lacked in knowledge of the mastery over the natural world. I don't know why I said tackled. He lacked in it. So that's where we're at right now. And God made the humorous picture for Job with an ox. Verses 13 through 18, Job explains ostrich. I think. Yeah, ostriches. Maybe Job explained why the flightless bird has wings, or why the creature has flightless. God reminded Job that he's the dispenser of the wisdom. So pretty much like Job's like, well, I know this, but God's like, I'm the one that gave you that wisdom. Verses 19 through 25, Job knew about the strength of the horse, yet he had no strength to give the horse. It came from God, not Job. So he's like showing, like, you might know about this, but I'm the one that even made that a thing, pretty much. Verses 26 through 30, after considering the land animals and wisdom, God turned to the majestic bird. Job is equally powerless when it comes to explaining the eagle. So that is where we're at right now, and that is the end of chapter 39. So going on to chapter 40. Chapter 40, verses 1 through 2. God's challenge to Job continued. God answered Job's heart without answering his questions. Job now felt humbled. So Job's like, he feels it now. He's like, I was just like humbled so much by God. Like, I don't even know what I was thinking. So that's where we're at right now. Verses 3 through 5. Job is the only one out of the 5 friends. Yeah. Job is the only one out of the 5 friends to speak to God. Yet now Job spoke with a different tone. He was ashamed about his earlier tone. So he's pretty much like, he's now like humbled and he's calmed down. He's like, I can't believe I talked to God like that, like argued with him. Like, he's literally ashamed of himself so much. Going on, verses 6 through 9, God is still present with Job in the midst of the storm. God indicated Job is not done yet. You may think Job is more concerned about the integrity of himself rather than God. So pretty much like you might think like Job coming back with this like humbled, you might think like, oh, Job's just like trying to get back like his integrity. But he's not. Like, Job is like seriously understanding this. We are almost done. Look, one more page. Going on, verses 10 through 14, God challenged Job to do something only God can do. Job recognized he couldn't do it. He remembers his proper place before God. So God challenges him another thing, and Job is like, I know I can't do like that. Is all you, God. Verses 15 through 24, God gave Job a survey of wonders. God gives Job a look at a baby mammoth. I can't say that word. I literally can't. Behemoth. That word. And a Leviathan. That's a monster, okay? These are monsters, I think. God seems to rejoice at his creation. He describes the creatures. So that's the end of chapter 40. Now I have to go on to explain these creatures that I'm struggling to speak with. But going on to chapter 41. Chapter 41. Going on, verses 1 through 11. God called Job to consider the monsters. God's point is to show Job the powerlessness that Job has. and couldn't even imagine to try to fight these monsters. This was just another way for God to put Job in his place. So God's like, these are literally monsters. You cannot defeat these. You can't even fathom to try to compete with these creatures that I made myself. So this is just like God still like pushing him. Job was way up here. He pushed him to about here. He's getting him to about here. So he's like humbling him still. Verses 12 through 21. This also leads us to believe God had in mind way more than the species we know. That he's describing seems like a dragon. So like what God is describing in these, it seems like a dragon, like what we would think of as a dragon. Then God seems to make a Leviathan and Satan go together. So like he's comparing Satan and the Leviathan. Okay, going on, verses 22 through 34. 34. That's the end of this chapter. God continued to speak, comparing the monster and Satan. So this is like bullet points that I have written down that are like how they're compared. They're strong, they're cruel, they're dependent strongly, and they're hard of heart. They can't be attacked, and they're filled with pride. So this is all the things how the Leviathan and Satan compare to each other. So that is the end of chapter 41. Going on to chapter 42. This is the last chapter, and thank you guys so much for watching this video. And before we go on to the next chapter, I do want to say, don't forget to like and subscribe down here. That would literally be amazing of you. And then also go follow my TikTok and Instagram, both under Jesus in Mind 00. So go on and get into chapter 42. Chapter 42. Last chapter, guys. We got this. Verses 1 through 6. The display from Job was connected to God's display of power. Also had to do with the sense of comfort God brought Job. Before, Job seemed to want to challenge God. Now he is being respectful by asking God for the right to speak. So now Job is finally like calmed down, like he's like ready, he's respectful, he's calmed down, he's quiet down, he's listening to God. Verses 7 through 9, God rebuked Job's 3 companions, addressing Eliphaz as their head. The friends would have been right, just not in Job's situation. They made it seem like God was angry with Job, but he wasn't. So God is like, now he's turned. He's talked to Job already. Now he's turned and he's talking to his friends that were being mean to him this whole time. And he's like, guys, I was not mad at Job. Like, he's kind of like, their sins would have been right. Like I've said earlier, like their sins would have been right for someone that was in the sinful situation, but Job wasn't. So that's where we're at right now. Then verses 10 through 11. Without Job ever asking, God restored his wealth to him. Job, once being an outcast, even from family, was now all restored relationships. So now, like, God is restoring everything back to Job because Job stayed faithful to them. Verses 12 through 17. Now, by the end of all this, we find Job even more blessed and godly. Nothing can restore Job's children's, but evidence does show that his relationship with his wife was restored. So that is the end of Job, and I have had an absolute blast going through this with you guys, and I hope that you guys had a blast too. And so pretty much Job came out of this whole bad situation more godly and more blessed than he was before. So I think that just kind of goes to show, like, you might think that you're already godly and blessed, but you can always become more godly and more blessed. And even though you're going through a hard time, it might be the absolute best thing that has ever happened to you later in life. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this so much. Like I said earlier, go follow my TikTok and Instagram, both under Jesus in Mind 00, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye!